I'll show you the password.
Yeah, don't want to say it out loud. Got it. Thanks. Everyone walking by could have some Wi-Fi.
Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. It's Friday. It's great to be with you. My name is Jerry Miller. Like I mentioned in the teaser leading up to the show, so pumped for today's program. Scott Beyer, Rory Stolzenberg in the house. One of them is a planning commissioner. The other one is a fantastic journalist, the founder and president of the Market Urbanism Report, about to launch a consulting firm that I think he's going to headquarter in New York City, maybe next week, moving from Charlottesville next week to the Big Apple. We're going to spend 60 minutes with these gentlemen talking trends in Charlottesville, Virginia. Put your questions, comments, perspectives, anything that you have in mind in the stream. I see Nicole Scrow is watching the program right now. I see Wendell Gibson watching the program right now. I see 3 different builders watching the show as we speak. First, let me thank some of our clients. Look, VMV Brands and I Love CVille, we are an advertising agency. I start the program by just cutting straight to the chase. An advertising agency. We represent, as of this morning, 113 clients up and down the East Coast. 2 of our favorites, Interstate Pest Control and Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine. Any aspects of those brands that interface with the marketplace originate on the first and second floor of the Macklin building. Interstate started in 1969 with the first generation, Mr. Robert Wells. He used his personal truck, sweat equity, and payphones around Charlottesville in 1969 to build a company. Today, this business has 4 generations of family running it, almost 100 team members, and a Commonwealth-wide working footprint. Dr. Wagner, 7 years working alongside his brand, our company. He has 6 doctors under his direction, almost 30 chiropractic assistants. He bought the old Quinn Farmer auction house, and he's changing people's lives through chiropractic care, physical therapy, and sports medicine. Judah, let's studio cam. Let's welcome the fellas to the show. Rory and Scott, what's up, fellas?
Hello.
Glad to be here.
Yes. Why don't we start with you? Before we get into the nitty-gritty, what are you about? Who's Rory Stolzenberg?
Sure. So I'm a local software developer, former entrepreneur, and now a planning commissioner. So I started a startup that helped out a bunch of independent restaurants back in the day, and now I work at a pretty cool company called Lumen, making smart electrical panels.
I love it. I love it. Scott Beyer, give him a snapshot of who you are.
Sure thing. I'm a journalist and founder of the Market Urbanism Report. I write columns for Forbes and the Independent Institute as well, and I'm about to move to New York City, probably early next week, to try to start a consulting firm that brings market urbanist policy into cities.
I love it. I love it. We're going to cut straight to the nitty-gritty. Let's go with the news that broke on Monday of this week. And Rory, we'll start with you. Free-flowing discussion. Don't wait for me to prompt. Derry Central Dairy Market, the corner of 10th and Preston, right in the heart of the Rose Hill and right in the heart of the 10th and Page neighborhoods. 2 publicly traded companies taking roughly 17,000 square feet or so in Derry Central, Class A office space. Open-ended question. What did you make of that news?
Yep. So, of course, pretty expected. They built a bunch of Class A office space and then leased it out. But interesting to see Fortune 500 companies going in there. Of course, one of them, Dexcom, acqui-hired a local startup called Type Zero just a couple years ago now, about a year or so, I think. And so it's not really clear yet whether they'll be putting a bunch of new resources in town and making new jobs here, or if they're just moving the old Type Zero people over from Ix into Derry Central. And then I'm not super familiar with the new one yet, but it'll be interesting to see who comes into those office spaces.
What do you think?
I think it seems like a good thing for the neighborhood. You've seen sort of the development that comes from downtown up to that area. So you've got several coffee shops, Millie Joe's, Shenandoah Joe's. You've got cool bakeries. You've got new breweries that have opened up probably in the last 5 or 10 years. And so this seems like a natural evolution, I'd say, of the city from we used to have a town and gown divide where much of the development was either in the UVA area or downtown, and there was a lot of really not so much development in between and a lot of disinvestment. And I think that you're seeing finally investment in that area.
What do you think, Rory, of the impact it's going to have on first the community and more micro 10th and Page?
Yeah, I think certainly it's going to increase housing demand in the area a bit because people want to live near their jobs. But on the whole, I think it's really fitting into kind of long-term trends of like Scott said, the Preston Avenue corridor is ripe for more investment. And I'm particularly excited to hear about the non-office aspects of that building.
Yeah.
The food hall, I think, will be pretty cool. Maybe this is just me biased coming from a restaurant background, but anytime you can reduce the barriers to entry to starting a restaurant business, so people can reduce the investment they're putting in and start a company and start selling food, and then they can grow it from there. I think that's enormously beneficial for getting people to start owning their own businesses and growing it.
12 food stalls allocated and created in Dairy Market. What do you make of this topic?
Well, I'd be curious and to hear Rory's feedback on this as well, but it seems like in a lot of cases when you have new offices, particularly Class A offices opening in cities, there's often not much of a housing component. I mean, this comes up all the time in California specifically, where because of specific tax laws, they zone for office and commercial, they don't zone for a lot of housing, and so you get this huge jobs housing imbalance. You've got people who are working those jobs having to commute in from elsewhere. And so I'm curious with this project as well, why would there not have been more housing to around the immediate area to complement these uses?
Dairy
So
Central
actually, in
does
this
have
case,
apartments.
Yeah, they did pretty well on that.
Yeah.
So they are building apartments, I think in the second phase is how it
Okay.
works. So they started with gutting the old dairy building and building that kind of addition on the back that was all offices.
Yeah.
But they're next going to be adding apartments just sort of next door and behind. And actually, it's pretty cool. They're taking what has been a super block. So back in the post-war period, you kind of had this urban renewal, like tearing down what was there
Right.
and agglomerating it into this giant block that you can't really get through. It's mostly parking lot. And they're taking it up and putting the historical streets that used to be there back. And that should make it, again, bringing it back to the historical street grid, it should feel a little bit more like a small urban center over there.
It's going to be a live, work, play kind of epicenter with the food piece, with a tap room in Star Hill, with some nice apartments in the mix. I have friends that live in 10th and Page, and they strategically chose to live in 10th and Page because of A, the price point, and B, because they wanted to raise their kids in a diverse neighborhood. Having coffee with them, having beverages with them, they have mentioned, and the moms in particular, that we're very nervous about the following. I mentioned this to you off air as well, that our assessments and real estate taxes are going to go up. I'm very concerned, Jerry, that this is going to go from being a diverse neighborhood to a white neighborhood, with a lot of the folks that are at Dairy Central wanting to walk to work, like you've said. And I'm also concerned that perhaps the increased density that could be coming may not have the infrastructure in the neighborhood to support the popularity that could be coming down the pipeline. Are any of these statements fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a concern. Anytime you have this kind of localized redevelopment in an area, it does sometimes increase the demand for the area surrounding it. So unless you meet that demand with new housing, you've got people coming in with nowhere to go except for existing housing. So the apartments they're going to be building there will lessen some of that pressure. But I mean, it's just a fact that the places what we pick to have this sort of redevelopment, to zone, to allow this sort of thing, are the places that are adjacent to generally historically black neighborhoods like 10th and Page, rather than places that, in fact, even had this development before zoning existed, like North Downtown.
Why is that?
That's just a function of political power and people not wanting this sort of thing near them. So they force it to places where, people weren't able to organize to kind of rise up and stop it, where they just didn't have the votes on council or, the
influence.
The influence, exactly.
Scott Beyer.
Well, there's also a history of redlining. There's a redlining that affected a lot of cities that caused certain neighborhoods to be black and certain neighborhoods to be white. In most cities, a lot of the outlying neighborhoods that are more suburban in nature were typically white, and a lot of the interior neighborhoods are specifically black, and that's the case in Charlottesville as well. And so I think that's a lot of the reason that a lot of times Black neighborhoods are more targeted for gentrification and reinvestment because they happen to be centrally located.
So I would dispute that, actually. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think once you're in that post-war period where you have the flight from urban centers into suburbs, white flight, that's when you start to get the development of those outer ring suburbs. But prior to that, you had segregated neighborhoods all within the city, right? So North Downtown is the most proximate to downtown and was historically redlined to be white. You had Belmont, which is a historically white working class area, all very central. And yet, you see, I've got a friend who lives in North Downtown in an apartment building with at least a dozen units in it, and it's zoned R1 for single-family homes. We've seen such a downzoning to that extent in those neighborhoods that we don't even think about those locations when we talk about development and development pressures coming into Charlottesville. Because the developments never happen there because they've already been downzoned so far that it's not even on the table. You can't get a special use permit. You probably can't get a rezoning. It's just not allowed. It's just out of the pale because it's been downzoned to essentially oblivion.
What do you think? I think there's a second layer to that too that I was going to add is that a lot of times black neighborhoods don't have the political sway to necessarily block off development the way white neighborhoods do. So the comparison between Fifeville and Belmont would be relevant there. One was white, has basically blocked off a lot of development. The other one is black, and apparently they don't have as much political sway to block the development. But I would look at this angle as, I think both areas should be developed. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Certainly historically, the direct stated motivations for us having a zoning ordinance and having a comprehensive plan starting in the 60s with Harlan Bartholomew all go down to this racist intent.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much out of the question. And I think, we have to think about when we're talking about these disproportionate impacts on certain neighborhoods versus others, it's why are these impacts disproportionate? And it all goes back to that, really.
Yeah. Edgar Castro giving you some props. Paul, your brother, watching. Kip Chapman watching. Jeanette Buchner watching. You're going to have to help me with Mr. Snow's first name. Is it Cornelius? Your friend that's watching right now, I'm butchering his first name.
Not actually his name, don't
Danny
worry.
Rose. Okay, Danny Rose, welcome to the program. Our friends at City Hall, per usual, watching the show. Doug Danzy, the entrepreneur, watching the show. Comments, concerns, questions, put them in the comment section of any of the 12 Facebook pages. Let's talk this topic that comes up often. Say Fifeville and the Cherry Avenue corridor, parallel to West Main.
Yeah.
Proximity close to everything. One of the last affordable air quotes, destinations from a housing standpoint in Charlottesville city limits. Open-ended first and then specifics. Future of, say, a Fifeville and Cherry Avenue corridor over the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
Interesting. I think in any 3 to 5 year period, you're not going to see super significant changes, but we do have the Fifeville Small Area Plan in development as TJPDC, the Planning District Commission, is running that program, and slowly over the course of the last couple of years, they've been putting together this plan for the vision for their community. So I suspect we'll see that come before us to be adopted later this year or sometime next year, and that will really lay out the vision for what it's intended to look like. But I think right now what you see is, so of course, Fifeville, largely zoned R1, certainly the Prospect Orangedale neighborhood, or sub-neighborhood technically, is largely zoned R2 because it's all duplexes already. That was sort of part of the last rezoning, the last major downzoning in 1991, which was done with better intentions, I'd say, than the previous ones before that. We saw that large areas of the city had been protecting themselves by downzoning themselves, but that had excluded lots of neighborhoods that didn't have the political influence earlier. And in 1991, while the city was losing population, we went ahead and said, let's downzone everybody else too and give everyone some protection. So what we're seeing there now is prices, so the housing types and typology of what you see around you is remaining largely static. Mostly single-family homes, but certainly a good mix of duplexes and other missing middle homes that are non-conforming thrown in. But of course, it's perfectly legal to tear down an older single-family home and build a new one. So we're seeing, because it's so close to UVA, so close to the hospital,
And it's affordable.
that developers or flippers are buying these smaller, older homes, tearing them down, and building new single-family detached homes up to the limits of what the zoning envelope allows. So you can have 35 feet. You can go so far from your side yard. You have to have a minimum amount of side yard, but within that, you can build
A McMansion.
some building.
Yeah.
You could say in fact, our zoning envelope allows the exact same thing for a duplex as it does for a single-family detached. The only thing you're not allowed to do in R1 is to split a line down the middle and make it two homes.
Interestingly, I'm going to throw it to you, a perfect example of what he's talking about are the $400,000 to $500,000 homes on 10th Street between Peloton Station and Red Hub Food Co., the very colorful houses that are on 10th Street, destroyed homes and then built $400,000 and $500,000 homes up along 10th Street. Scott, anywhere you want to go?
Well, it seems to me that you were talking earlier about your 10th and Page friend who was saying, how do we stop assessments from increasing too much in this neighborhood? How do we stop land values from increasing too much? I think with 10th and Page, like with Fifeville, the land values are going to increase either way. And so it's like we either need to build a lot of housing in those areas and divide the cost of that land across multiple units, or we're going to get what he's talking about where you tear down one home and build another larger home. It is interesting to me, your question, how much is Fifeville going to change in the next 3 to 5 years? I would say, based on what he answered, probably not that much because the zoning is in place. And if you look at the Charlottesville zoning map, it's like there's this little blotch of yellow there in the Fifeville area where normally it would not be yellow unless you go further out into the city.
I think how it could change, and I'm going to slide this back so you can just talk into it. I think how it's going to change is, I went to UVA. I lived in Belmont. My first place with 3 buddies outside of the UVA bubble was on Little Graves behind the old Spud Nuts.
Right.
And when we moved there in, say, 2005, it was like going through this transition where it was still working class, but then I started seeing like attorneys and like doctors and people that are working for the CPA firms downtown come in, gut homes, knock them down, rebuild. And I'm like, what the hell is happening here? And the OG, the old guard of the neighborhood, was so opposed and trepid, but they didn't have they weren't galvanized or organized enough to keep it from happening. And then next thing you know, Belmont, which was starter homes, turns into $500,000 plus homes. I think that's what's going to happen to Fifeville and 10th and Page.
It's a really good point. There's 2 types of change, right? There's the physical change, the physical homes and what they look like. And that's the sort of thing the Planning Commission, it's in our domain, that's what we affect. And then there's the demographic change, there's the people change. And of course, some amount of that is going to happen naturally. People age, they die, they leave their homes to their kids. But a lot of that is driven by the larger change within the city. And of course, we don't have any laws that can restrict you from moving to a specific place anymore, thank God. And so when you leave the housing types, the houses themselves the same, you see them go, like in Belmont, from $100,000-something homes to $500,000 homes, even though the houses haven't changed, they haven't improved half the time. It's just that more people want it. And some people want it at that $500,000 price point because you can't keep them out. They're the ones who get to buy it.
And then there's a trickle over effect to the rest of the neighborhood. You have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great division right there. You can choose to keep the physical character the same, but you can't prevent the demographic character from changing, particularly in a dynamic jobs market like this where we do have companies coming to town and new people will come. Yeah, the neighborhoods are going to change demographically. It just depends on how does the city want to respond to that with the zoning.
The only thing potentially, and you guys are the experts here, the only way I can feel like the city or a council or city hall can manage this is by potentially protecting the old guard in the neighborhood from the tax increases through tax incentives of some kind. And what I mean by this, if I own a home that's been in my family forever, and I'm on a fixed income, and I'm in my 60s, and I don't have a lot of disposable income,
Yeah.
and the homes that are on my street are now owned by doctors, lawyers, bankers, whatever, and they dump money into them and the assessments go up, that's going to have a trickle over impact to me. Eventually, I'm going to feel the sting and say, to hell with this. I need to sell my home
Yeah.
and chase short-term capital. And that's how the gentrification happens. It continues to gain momentum. Thoughts?
Yeah, and that's something that we do. We have tax relief for the elderly, for veterans, and for disabled homeowners.
Do enough of the people
right?
know about it?
I'm not sure if that's the case.
Okay.
And it is fairly restricted. Of course, there's income limits, and we've raised those. But if you're in your 60s, well, I guess half the people in their 60s can qualify. You have to be over 65. It raises this interesting conundrum, right? So if your house you bought for $120,000 20-something years ago, it's now worth $600,000 because your neighborhood has appreciated so much. You've gained $500,000 in real wealth, right? The problem, of course, comes from the fact that
where are you
your
going to
wealth
buy?
Isn't liquid.
Exactly.
Yeah, you'd have to sell your house to realize that in cash, or get a home equity line of credit.
Yeah.
And so that means when your tax assessment goes up, your actual tax paid goes up. Of course, we haven't raised tax rates in decades. That means that you might not have the cash to provide that or to pay that. And so there's two ways to combat that, really. One is to provide relief, or maybe defer the tax until the home is sold. And the other, of course, is to make sure that the value of your home does not rise out of control. And some homeowners in the city really advocate for their property values to be preserved, to be increased, and they're rooting for that every step of the way. And then we see many homeowners who don't like this constant rise in assessments because it's squeezing their cash position, and they can't afford to pay the taxes, and then they're forced out of their homes. And that's directly a result of our city policies that force their home prices to go up beyond what the market would ordinarily do, because we're constraining supply.
And there's two other components besides just the people who already own the home. The other is the renters in the neighborhood, and you can have a voucher system that enables them to stay in the neighborhood. Although granted, that would be expensive, because if you're living in a neighborhood where the home prices are appreciating a lot, the voucher will need to be pretty significant to be able to go anywhere in that neighborhood. The other thing is having some sort of city program that spurs the growth of new housing that is actually affordable. So I know that the idea of land banking by the city has been thrown around in various years, and the idea of a city buying land and leveraging various state and federal tax credits to be able to build affordable housing. So that's a way that, because I think we had this debate when I was on with Kathy Galvin as well, is that the current market in Charlottesville, the market rate housing is not going to be affordable to people below a certain income threshold. So yeah, you leverage tax credits and you buy city land and build affordable housing, and that way you have an economically mixed neighborhood.
And it's interesting, this concept of affordable housing is this nebulous concept.
What is
a lot of people
affordable
don't
housing?
understand what it
Yes,
means.
yes.
So for any given family, right, so if you're renting a house or buying a house,
Yeah.
the housing that's affordable to you is defined as a home where you can pay less than 30% of your income to pay for your home. And then as a citywide concept, we normally say, well, if you make 10 times the median income, I don't care how much you pay for your home.
Yeah.
So we define it usually as 80% of the median income and below. Those are the families we care about. Sometimes it's defined all the way up to 120% of the median income. So over half of people would need affordable housing, or sometimes that 80 to 120 band is called workforce housing. And to me, it's certainly true that the market can provide housing that is affordable, that costs less than 30% of your family's income at 80% of AMI, and even lower. And there will always,
in
as Scott
Charlottesville.
said,
In Charlottesville.
so can and does different concepts here.
I'm not saying that it can in theory, and in fact it does all over the country in more elastic markets, but I'm saying the specific concept of Charlottesville, where we're so overregulated and we have relatively little new housing coming in the pipeline. The market does not create affordable housing in that context.
Right, can and does are different,
Yeah.
and some would say that if it's regulations constraining it, it's not really the market.
It's not really
doing
the
it.
market.
So there will always, though, like you said, there will always be families that won't be able to afford market rate. Like even if we took all the regulations off, said build as much as you can, we're only going to get the cheapest housing down to, probably 50% of AMI is doable, certainly 60, 70% of AMI. You should be able to find market rate housing at those rates if we didn't have these constraints that drive it up citywide. Sure. Like, for example, when I first graduated from UVA and started out as a real adult in Charlottesville and tried
Where'd
to
you live?
bootstrap my company, I lived in Fry Spring, right on Mosley Drive, in a little duplex, one side of it.
Great spot.
Yep, of course it's zoned R1, so it's non-conforming. Actually, unbeknownst to me, while I
You were
lived
breaking
there,
the law there.
the Fry Spring neighborhood tried to downzone the rest of the R2 in the neighborhood down to R1.
Was that being subdivided
they didn't
excessively as well?
No, we were technically a legal, non-overcrowded household.
You were?
On the edge.
Yeah.
That part of Charlottesville, 4 are allowed in a house. Some parts of Charlottesville, only 3 unrelated people are allowed in a house. Of course, if you're related, you can have as many as you want. We have the city like making a definition of what a family is, which to me is appalling.
Ridiculous, right?
But when I lived there, that home cost, like, it was assessed at about $120,000. So it's
Wow.
very doable for smaller homes that don't use a lot of land, perhaps because they share it with other homes on the same parcel or on a subdivided parcel, as in that case, to get to that level, especially if they're older homes. But as soon as you have a bunch of people who want to move in and there's nowhere available for them to go, they're going to say, hey, wow, there's a $120,000 house right there. It's pretty big. This is pretty nice. Like, I'll bid $200,000 for that. I'll bid $250,000 for that, because my alternative is a $400,000 detached house down the road. And so that's how those home prices move up and up. And it's all a result of this growth in population in Charlottesville that is not, where the housing supply is not meeting that growth. So that there are people left without homes, and they find themselves bidding against other people, and they have the means to outbid them because they're the type of person who now works at Dairy Central.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see what that duplex that you were living in costs nowadays, because if you look at the Trulia listings in Charlottesville, it's all over the board in respect to the prices of different housing, and I don't know exactly what factors into that, but you will see little like 1960s brick ranch homes that are going for like $250,000, $350,000. It's just, so I mean, it seems like the type of thing that you're saying would cost $120,000 however many years ago would be significantly more now.
Yeah, absolutely. So luckily I have that right here in this cool little data viz I made.
One shot here, J-Dubs.
See if we can get in there. So that home was assessed at $130,000 back in 2013 when I moved in. And now if we scroll over, you can see all that went red. So this is the Fry Spring neighborhood right here. And so that is now worth $201,000.
Can you? This is putting you on the spot here. This is putting you on the spot.
So that's over a 50% increase.
Can you send the infographics to Judah?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so contact@vmvbrands.com. Contact@vmvbrands.com. Judah, I'm putting you on the spot here. Take the infographics coming in from Rory via email and put them on screen. Interesting breaking news, just put it on the stream, positioned on the stream by Nolan Stout, who covers Charlottesville City Hall for the Charlottesville Daily Progress. The Daily Progress moments ago published an article, and it's now on my stream, on my Facebook page, about Charlottesville and City Hall hiring an independent consultant to assess the structural integrity of the unfinished Dewberry structure on the downtown mall. If this independent consultant finds this structure to be unstable or not within code, they're going to deem this property blight and demand that Dewberry takes it down. This literally broke moments ago, and the reporter just put it on the stream today. We're going to get into this topic, put it on the stream like 8 minutes ago. Why don't we get into this topic right now? He's going to send those graphics to Judah.
Yep.
Dewberry, whatever he's calling it now, he's rebranded it so many times. Bloomberg called him the Emperor of Empty Lots. I Love CVille calls him the extorting Emperor of Empty Lots, an Atlanta developer that land banks and does nothing in the short or midterm for the properties he owns for the community.
Yeah, I would hope actually that he doesn't have to tear it down. I would hope that the structure he built can be converted in some way into housing. And so I guess, I don't know, how is that going to happen?
So I've long been the one guy
You have
in the whole
interesting
city
takes on this.
Yeah.
who
You're like,
doesn't
tax the
think
shit
it's
out of
a
them.
really big issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they pay more per square foot of land than almost anyone else in the downtown mall, except for the Wells Fargo building and the one with the impeccable pig, because it was the tallest building.
Do you have the actual numbers off the top of your head?
It's about $60,000 per year,
Okay.
which is not a ton. Certainly, his carrying costs on that $6.25 million he paid for it are going to be much higher in terms of things pushing him to actually build a thing. But my issue is a little bit. It's not quite just about that he's adequately pushed to build it. It's just that, like, I don't care that it's a big, tall, ugly building right there.
You look
I work
at
right
it
next to it.
from your
My
office.
window looks
Right.
directly at it. Certainly, it sucks. It would be great if there was a building there instead of an empty husk. The rats on my way home are a little annoying, though I always make sure to report it on the My CVille app. That always forces them to get an exterminator in. That's how you up those carrying costs by pushing these blight determinations. While I think it's far from the most important issue in Charlottesville, I certainly think that the city paying $7 million to seize the property and just get an empty husk and then have to spend another $20-30 million more to finish it is a ludicrous idea.
This is
we
kind
have
of,
way better uses of $7 million or $37 million.
It's political leverage, is what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Whenever we, within the auspices of the law, can say, hey, this derelict husk that you have here is inflicting harm on the surrounding neighborhood, certainly if it's unstable and is about to topple on my office where I sit, that's concerning. And I think that's exactly the sort of lever we should be pushing. So forget about this buying it.
What was
that.
your take on the tax abatement? Because from what I understand, we did have a deal with them,
Yeah.
and there were certain people in City Hall who were looking at this in kind of a purist way and saying that we don't want to have any tax carve-outs for any one specific business. Whereas I would look at, in this specific situation, it seemed like a very extreme situation where we have an empty husk hovering over downtown. And so I'd be curious to hear what your take is.
Yeah, so
on
I'm
that.
strongly opposed to the tax abatement. And it's not just the tax abatement, to be clear. That deal had two parts.
The parking
One
component.
of them was a 40-year lease,
Yeah.
way below market, on 75 spaces in
On the
the
parking.
Water Street parking garage. That was actually worth well over $1 million. Then the other half was a 10-year tax abatement, which would be worth about $1 million.
That went to the bottom of the ninth inning. In fact, Michael Payne had a lot to do with kiboshing this deal. I love Michael, but that's a fact.
And so the parking agreement, the parking lease was actually approved. So they got over half of that incentive package. And they just canceled that lease last March because they decided not to do it. And we canceled the abatement. And I think that was the right decision.
But as far as the abatement, if the property is getting approved and assessed at far higher values after it has been approved, isn't that abatement going to pay for itself?
So you're right. It's a tax increment abatement. So it would, by definition, be paying for itself out of the increment. But I think you're losing some of the nuance there, which is that if you meet hotel demand with those spaces there, those rooms there, that means you're reducing demands at our other hotels, which we've seen a number of pop up around town. We now have Gallery Court going up near UVA.
Quirk is coming.
Those are all within city limits, and those will all be paying that transient occupancy tax. So there's no reason to believe that 100% of the demand for Landmark or Dewberry hotel rooms would not have existed in the city of Charlottesville. They would move, or at least part of it would move to these other hotels. So we're not really saving all of that money. Meanwhile, you're setting a terrible
Precedent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're saying
I would chase that
anytime
same
you
tax
want a
abatement.
big package of
Yeah.
money.
Give it to
if
me
I'm
too.
Jerry Miller and I
Yeah.
own the Macklin
Yeah.
building, like.
I literally would do
Tear
that.
it apart, like
Yeah.
graffiti all over it, and just wait for City Hall to give you a nice big package so you can do exactly what you're going to do in the first place. No, screw that.
I swear I would have done that.
And I think the thing that people don't appreciate either is that there's nothing in the tax abatement that would have required him to do it. He could have just gotten the agreement and then decided that it was uneconomical to build, partially because there's a bunch of new competition in hotels in town.
And converted.
And then just discarded it all.
Right.
And left it as an empty husk. And I think that's probably the most likely thing of what actually happened is that $1 million didn't really flip it from pencils out and totally profitable to totally unprofitable. It probably wouldn't have been profitable either way. That's why even with $1.5 million plus in free parking spaces, which would have made it even more
the Market Street
necessary
garage
that we put $15 million into this parking garage over there. It wasn't worth it even with that, so I doubt it would have been worth it with a tax abatement. I think we would still have an empty hut.
This is, okay, so guys, the breaking news that just got reported on the show by Nolan Stout of the Daily Progress is Charlottesville planning to inspect the structural integrity of the Dewberry building on the downtown mall. Charlottesville is hiring an independent consultant to assess the structural integrity, and if it's effed, for lack of a better phrase, I said that, it could be deemed blighted and hasta luego, the husk on the mall. Time will tell if this is a reality. Let's talk parking. You have a lot to say on this. I know you have a lot to say this. So Guadalajara on Market Street and Lucky 7 on Market Street, now owned by the City of Charlottesville. The plan tentatively in the early stage is to build a 300 parking space monstrosity on Market Street. Correct me if I'm wrong. The cost to build a 300 space garage, is it $52K a space?
Yep, about there.
About $52,000 a space.
Oh, and that's per space total.
Right.
But of those 306 spaces, over 110 already exist sitting right there.
Exactly.
So for your incremental spaces, it's going to be a lot more.
Exactly, and that doesn't include the retail.
Nope.
And that doesn't include the maintenance moving forward. Parking structures have tons and tons of metal driving on them. Mm-hmm. They take a shitload of money to maintain. So let's call it 15, 16 million out of pocket of taxpayer dollars. I did 300 times 52K. It's probably going to be more than that, closer to 20.
15.5 million minimum,
Yeah, so we're talking about 15.5 million of, you first here, 15.5 million of taxpayer dollars to build a garage on Market Street, open-ended, anywhere you want to go.
Well, so a couple things. I think that we could have better paid for that project by doing an air rights deal, which is something that we had talked about on Facebook as well, which is rezone the property so that it can be a 10-story building. If 3 of the stories are structured parking, sell the 7 above for apartments, and you're getting a cash, and a developer would buy that airspace, give a cash windfall to the city, and suddenly you've got an asset on that land rather than a liability. But I think the other thing is, have we established that we're in a parking shortage yet? Because from what I understand, our 2 garages are very rarely at capacity. Mm-hmm. And so I think, and also, although our side street parking often gives off the impression that it's overcrowded, a lot of that is because we underprice for it. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this idea that we are even in a parking shortage in the first place, and that we need to be investing this huge capital cost into building a 3rd garage.
Yeah, it's actually categorically false that we're in a parking shortage. We spent a bunch of money on a parking study in 2015. They went out there and counted all of the parking spaces available and not available for a week or 2. They came back with a report, and that report explicitly did not say to build a new parking garage. It said to better manage and allocate existing parking, because there's plenty of spaces available, but it's poorly managed. So lots of people need to stop by the downtown mall for 15 minutes. They can't find a space because everything around there is 2 hours or unlimited. Yeah. And so those parking spaces are taken by people who are working there all day, but could walk a couple blocks further if they parked a little bit further away. Certainly now that we have scooters, that's going to extend the range of the useful downtown commuter parking area. It also recommended that we establish a parking department where the explicit goal of the parking department was to better manage this, not only just the parking spaces themselves, but to encourage people to get out of their cars and take alternative means to work. And we hired a parking director who I think is very good at his job, Rick Siebert, and he'll tell you all this too, is that what we should be focusing on is getting people out of their cars, getting alternative means of transportation to work.
Lime, Bird.
Yep.
Charlottesville City Hall, a bitter divorce with Lime and Bird. Yeah. That would help solve this situation, Scott Beyer.
Well, I don't know. So I think a lot of times when people bring in the alternative transport argument and they say that people could get out of their cars and take alternative transport, I think a lot of people look at that as being sort of naive and like it's not going to happen. But I mean, even if you take at face value that you're going to have the same number of car trips and the same number of VMT, still though, even given that, we still don't have a parking shortage, do we?
No, we don't.
I mean, like you said.
Yeah, and I think something that's important to say, it's outside of the scope of that 2015 study, but a lot of it is if you want people to walk to work or to take a scooter to work or whatever downtown, you need to put housing downtown so they can live near their place of work. That's what I do. I live over on Water Street. I work over on Water Street. I've got a 2-block commute. It's pretty great. More than that, we still have parking minimums, so anytime you're building an office building or even residential, you need to build parking as part of it. So Code has parking. Apex is going to have hundreds of new spaces downtown, privately built, more than we're putting in this new public garage, without a cent of taxpayer money. And when you live downtown and work downtown and your work provides you a free parking space, suddenly you don't need a second parking space for your home because it's just as convenient to have that parking space right there at your office, which no one will be using at night anyway.
And that's why City Council, I'm going to throw this to you, and you have a lot of ammunition on this topic. That's why City Council made 2 mistakes that were very obvious. Oliver Kutner's micro apartments and Keith Woodard's West 2nd development that you have, and you had a back and forth with Dr. Wes Bellamy about this on social media. I thought you made very strong points about the West 2nd project falling by the wayside due to City Council, and it's now an empty parking lot. Yeah,
and I guess, so what, we have 137 total units between those 2 projects, I believe. We're looking at maybe...
Yeah, that's 233 in the studios alone.
Oh, that was 233.
For Kutner's.
Yeah.
And then 97 for the West 2nd. So that we're talking hundreds of units there, hundreds of households that could be plopped right downtown within walking distance of almost every single thing they need to do every day.
You're getting...
I will say those are 2 different things. The studio apartments were completely privately built without a dime of city assets or city money. It was opposed because there would be a parking garage facing the street rather than retail. And now what we're getting is the exact same building almost by right with a 4-story parking garage
but
and
office
5 stories
space.
of office, Class A office space above it,
right.
which does the opposite of helping us their problem. The West 2nd's a little bit different because we would have been putting
city
$3
money.
million worth of city land into that. And I think it really comes down to, for that $3 million of city land, we wanted benefits for the city. And
there were some benefits for the city market.
The benefits the city wanted were a giant open plaza for the city market, which personally, living across the street from the city market, living across the street from West 2nd, I live in York Place. I would love to see that developed. I think it was a huge waste to put a giant open plaza there. I would much rather we have asked for city benefits in the form of affordable housing, which I think the developer would have been happy to do if he didn't have to leave 3/4 of the lot empty for a giant open plaza.
I don't agree. I think that the main benefit there was to have a structured farmers market, and I think that the benefit of affordable housing, that is a very expensive way to provide affordable housing, to take a concrete or steel frame structure that's high rise and on some of the primest land in downtown, and to say that should be affordable housing.
All the affordable housing in that agreement, even after the renegotiation, were going to be provided off-site on Harris Road or Harris Street.
Oh, so that was
they were off-site apartments.
Okay.
They renegotiated it for more and for a longer period of time, but none of them were going to be in the physical building. And I see where you're coming from there. However, once you're building a concrete and steel structure anyway, to make that taller, your marginal price, your price for the extra floor, the extra unit, is going to be less than your average price for what you put there already. Certainly, to make it square instead of a ridiculous L shape around an open plaza is going to cost you less than putting up a brand new, like de novo concrete and steel structure.
Let's get to comments from the people. Jeanette Buchner. I agree with the no parking, and the parking shortage is not there. She says, Scott Beyer, you're very smart. Kyle Irvin from Charlottesville Albemarle Transit. My man Rory, looking forward to your presentation on January 27th. Thanks for being an advocate for transit in our community. 5 developers we see watching the program. Let's get to the DMs. I will get to the DMs here on Twitter, on Instagram here in a matter of moments. Judah says he has the screenshots for Fry Springs ready to go. Why don't you put those on screen so the viewers can see them and get educated from the infographics? I want to get to the Lyman Bird, like specifically the Lyman Bird. Both of you are passionate about this. I've seen you on e-scooters around Charlottesville, literally zipping around. I think they're fantastic. Here's the one question I want to throw to you that's under the radar. How about the allocation financially from Lyman Bird to the city of Charlottesville and what we lost through this divorce?
Yeah, absolutely. So every single scooter was paying $1 a day per device to the city, earmarked for bike ped. So we're talking over $100,000 a year just through the fleet that we had a few months ago, directly to bike ped, which was zeroed out in this coming year's proposed CIP. So we're now going to have no money for bike lanes. And all of the money should have come from these scooters, and we're limiting what's available. So we're not only reducing your mobility options, making it harder to find a scooter. A lot of the times, even when Lime was in town, it would be hard to find a scooter around downtown because obviously there's a lot of demand for those over by UVA. That's the main source of demand. Most people walk around there and take transit. And so when we kind of put this artificial cap on there, right? We said 125 scooters per company, 2 companies max, that's it. If you want more than that, too bad. I don't care if you're giving us a bunch of money. And that's both hurting Charlottesville residents who would like to take a scooter to go places and are forced into the
It's going to tax Charlottesville residents on the back end.
Yeah.
We're going to pay out of our pocket because of this divorce.
Absolutely, yeah. Or we'll just cut all of our funding for non-automobile infrastructure altogether, which is the current plan.
Go ahead.
And I think we have to look at the wisdom of some of the regulations. So the regulations that I was reading about in the Daily Progress were some combo of they wanted
Ratio with e-bikes and e-scooters.
That was the main one, but they wanted Lime to build a digital geofencing system to prevent them from going on sidewalks in the downtown mall. I think that would be really expensive, and I'm not sure if it's really. Lime didn't seem to think it was necessary that they can write in their rules that you can't go on the pedestrian mall without having to have a geofence. Second was the cap, which prevents the service from being able to scale. And then I think the third one, which was really strange, is this idea that for every, 150 scooters that you provide, every 100 scooters you provide, you have to provide 50 e-bikes. And I really don't see the wisdom of that.
It was so stupid.
You're talking about a startup that already has limited funds,
Yes.
and you can't just make any random demand from them as if they're a piggy bank.
Well, and on top of that, from an economic standpoint, for a startup, the e-bikes were the ones that were having components ripped off of them and stolen, and the e-bikes were the ones that were more prone to breaking down. The e-scooter companies, and correct me if I'm wrong, wanted to keep scooters because they were more durable and less likely to have parts stolen off them, which created more of a ubiquitous nature of the product as opposed to the bikes breaking down. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, and don't get me wrong, I think bikes are good. I would love to see e-bike services, e-bike shares in town.
Yeah.
And I think in our provisional regulations, we had a pretty good mechanism for that where we just exempted them from that cap. They just didn't count against it. They still had to pay the $1 a day. Sounds great. So Lime actually originally came in with a bunch of bikes, but then after they came to Charlottesville over the course of the last year, they've been retiring them nationwide because they just weren't working out for them. And I think it's a mistake, certainly, to tie those together, to say you can't bring scooters. I think if it hadn't been such a hard cap on scooters and therefore their total revenue, that it might have been, they might have been more amenable to bringing them in. But overall, I think a lot of people are acting as if this was an intentional way to push Lime out of town, as if it was a poison pill so that they'd get out.
You don't think it was?
Them. No, I think it was
Really?
much more likely to be a mistake or an oversight, where I don't think council knew that those regulations were even there when they voted on it.
It came down to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richmond, our state delegates, said by either December 31st or January 1, local municipalities in the Commonwealth had to have their own unique rules for managing e-scooters and e-bikes. And Dr. Richardson and City Council felt the pressure of putting in rules to maintain local autonomy.
That's correct, but we already had rules in our
We
pilot
did?
program, provisional rules.
Okay.
We've had rules
And then we
since
wrote
last
new
summer,
ones, right?
or last January. What?
And then we wrote new ones after the.
We wrote permanent
scrambled
regulations
some, yeah.
that I'm not sure it was adequately communicated that there were significant differences between the provisional regulations and the permanent regulations. And I think that's part of what contributed to this unfortunate outcome we found, where I don't think council was aware that what they were approving was significantly more onerous than what we had before. And if there had been, because I watched that council meeting and council was pretty pro scooters, I think. to their credit, council believes that it's a good thing if we get out of our cars.
Judah, thank you for handling that. We actually have someone
Yeah.
blowing and managing our
Weed whacking
property
blower
outside
prices.
with the leaf blower. Our
Post
director
on next door, loud
Our
leaf
director
blower
has
down
to,
the
actually,
street.
we hire him. Our director has to wear many hats here. Teresa Lau says hello and greetings from Toronto.
Hi, Teresa.
I'm enjoying this commentary right here. I have text messages and DMs coming in for the fellas. I want to spend some more. I love this stuff. I love this stuff that's coming in. All right, throw
Yeah,
this.
well, I was
go
about
ahead.
to. I was about to say actually, it seems like there's so much of an ecosystem here in Charlottesville for talking about exactly what we're talking about, and I'd like to organize some sort of event, or
A meetup.
to bring all these people together because it seems like there's several dozen
We
who
should
are just
do it-
always on the chat groups.
We should
talking
do it
about
at a brewery and all take the trolley together and go to the brewery. That would be so
Exactly.
much fun. A lot of stuff coming in. I want to get to the city yard. The city yard, okay, I'm going to give a snapshot and then you guys go anywhere you want.
Okay.
The city yard is roughly a 10-acre city-owned parcel in the heart of Star Hill. And city yard is used to maintain city vehicles and equipment and materials and tools that service the city of Charlottesville. New Hill Development Corporation, led by Yolanda Harrell, the CEO. New Hill is a nonprofit that was given $500,000 of taxpayer money to create a vision for the Star Hill neighborhood and how to build educational infrastructure and optimize Star Hill from an affordable housing standpoint. Their plan, which they presented in November of this past year, was to optimize the city yard and not take one of the primo properties in the city of Charlottesville for trucks and chainsaws and salt for roads, and instead develop it for affordable housing for people in the neighborhood. That's it in a snapshot, anywhere you want to go.
Yep, affordable and mixed income housing. So I think that's a great example of underused property in the middle of Charlottesville that we've long known is kind of a waste. It was, again, put there. It was the site of the old gas works, but as part of the urban renewal of Vinegar Hill, the city acquired this large parcel that we could just dump a bunch of trucks and industrial equipment in. And it's right in the center of our city, and in many ways divides our city in half, where to get around it, to get to the other side of town, you're walking past large swaths of essentially unused, certainly unfriendly territory to walk past. And I think repurposing it towards productive ends and towards housing people is a great idea.
Yeah, and I've heard kind of these one-off ideas that we should reconnect the grid in the sense that the portion of Main Street that now goes past the Artful Lodger and then kind of just devolves into a parking lot, that we could extend the road through that area and past the McDonald's and then go through the city yard, and you would be reconnecting the grid. And then build around it. I mean, yeah, I agree.
And a great example.
It's
is
very
on
much of an
Page Street.
underutilization.
There's an existing underpass underneath the railroad that's just fenced off because on the other side is the city yard, where we just cut off two sides of the city from each other.
Yeah, and so I mean, and the other thing about it is the whole thing with the New Hill Development Corporation. We're looking at an area that the city came in and destroyed, and so to transfer that to a private developer probably would not be appropriate because it's not looking into the context of the history. So I think the whole idea about forming this development corporation is the people who got screwed over in this process should have a say in seeing how their neighborhood is redeveloped. So I'm all for it.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity. They also provided a great framework towards getting from here to there to the full vision, where the first steps will be to just carve out a little bit around the city yard that isn't used right now, and to just start building housing there and to do it incrementally. And I think the best projects in urbanism are incremental like that, where you do one step at a time and it evolves over time.
We had
So
you and I had a very good back and forth on Twitter about this topic, and I think anyone that's watching the show, I think the most valuable ideas are originating in the Twitter sphere and then getting to the other social platforms. I think a lot of content and good content is starting there. So for the sake of the show, playing devil's advocate, the strategy you presented in the thread on Twitter was, yes, let's develop the city yard. And then let's find an affordable piece right in the urban ring. You earmarked and presented one along Avon, I believe, that was shared by Charlottesville Transit That's their headquarters there. And you said, let's create some vertical integration by having the city yard equipment, tools, vehicles, mechanics, all that stuff housed in the same spot where Charlottesville Transit's being housed. And then let's take the city yard and make it something special for the neighborhood here. For the sake of the show,
Yep.
I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. I like your idea.
And to be clear,
Yeah.
that was just something I threw out there.
I thought that was a damn good idea.
Industrial parcel
Yeah.
we can find around
Right.
here, and I'm like, well, there's probably something on Broadway. Nothing's up for sale right now.
Yeah.
But of course, we don't need it right now.
Right. I thought it was
then
great.
I realized we've got this 50-acre half-empty parcel.
That's
over
not
there.
being used.
Yeah.
I thought it was great. Okay.
I didn't
But
realize it was so large. Yeah.
for the sake of the show, devil's advocate, we are then moving city equipment a little further away from the heart of the city. Not by much.
Marginally, yeah.
Marginally, a little further. Creating potentially more overhead from fuel, manpower, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. After digesting your idea, again, I thought it was very good. I thought it would be something that should be focused on and included in the New Hill plan.
Interesting. I'm not sure it's exactly in scope for New Hill.
Okay.
New Hill, I think I guess I haven't read the
But they
original
gotta
proposal.
find.
It was
They gotta find a suggestion of where this is going to
assume
go.
that we move the thing.
Yes.
You figure out what to do with the space.
I
But
read the
definitely
proposal.
As part of it,
Yeah.
the city needs to figure out what are we going to do with the city yard.
That's what I'm saying.
And it's a no-brainer that anywhere that's not immediately in the city center is going to be less valuable, cheaper land. That's less disruptive to everyone around it, having heavy trucks coming in and out, than this parcel right in the middle of the city. So Down Avon, I think, would be a pretty good choice. We've got a largely undeveloped parcel where the CAT headquarters is now. There's like a park and ride there. It gives you easy access to 64, so you can jump right on that, and then jump right on 118, off exit 118, and go on 29 to get to wherever you need to in the city. I'd argue it's actually more accessible for these heavy trucks than to have them navigate these small city streets in the middle of the city. Yeah.
Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah, it's fundamentally it's a violation of basic comparative advantage principles to be putting a utility yard in the middle of prime city real estate, and I think really it speaks to the overall underutilization of that general area when you're talking about just what we've done with it since Vinegar Hill, since the Vinegar Hill fiasco. We've got strip mall, suburban style retail there, McDonald's, used to be an office supply store, various. It's sort of like it's a suburban aesthetic that has been put into that neighborhood.
Yeah, and I mean, underutilization is an interesting term. Like that area was very well utilized. It has
Sure.
what we probably now call like almost the ideal urban form of
Sure.
a main street with rich with businesses, small businesses, locally owned, and then dense housing of all kinds all around it, some of which were low quality, of course, but some of which were perfectly fine. And then the city, by a handful of votes, in a time where we're disenfranchising people with the poll tax, approves this acquisition to force everyone out of their land and to force everyone out of their homes and to seize it so that the people who participated in that white flight and moved to the urban ring and the surrounding suburbs can now drive in and have plenty of parking at Staples because the lot's always 3/4 empty. Like
Yeah.
that was their ideal of take our city and make it for people who don't live here.
I just got a tweet. We've got a few DMs and a couple tweets to get to. Jerry, when are you going to ask these guys your favorite topic, Fashion Square Mall? I'm going to say, much to the chagrin of Allison at the Daily Progress, we may bring this topic up. Before we do, how about the topic of what to do with the West Main Street parking lot? We had an analysis put on I Love CVille, or a suggestion, an idea. Your response to that suggestion was the obscene price tag that would need to be purchased if Charlottesville is going to buy this from Allan, Cadgene, a San Francisco lawyer. An acre of land and that kind of proximity of the heart of the city is probably about $4 million an acre. We're talking about 12 to 13.5 fair market value. Cadgene is deep pocketed. Dude is not going to sell it for any lower than that. He has no reason to sell it any lower than that. That is potential negative to my idea is $15 million to purchase a piece of land in the city. First, let's just go open at it. Scott, you go first here. West Main Street parking lot.
Well, I mean, in an ideal situation, it would obviously be the zoning would be changed so that it can be higher density, and you would have maybe like 3 10-story buildings spread across the different acres. You can have a plaza somewhere either in between or in the street-facing part of the lot.
You got the train.
You've got the train right there. You've got frequent transit access going down West Main. So I mean, and I think the analysis that I did was something like, if you were to do that at that density, it would be like 827 units or something based on the DUA. And so that
you
would be...
counter that density metric, I think, on Twitter.
Well, no, so I think what I was talking about was what's currently allowed.
He was saying what's currently allowed.
Gotcha.
And so obviously we would need... The weird thing about... You said it was what, 5 stories is the allowable density? The weird thing about that is that the lot is depressed below the street. So that would literally look like an extremely squat building if it were only built to the allowable zoning as of now.
And that's something we came across in the SIA form-based code we reviewed last week, where you've got parcels that were kind of, there's these artificial slopes that were made back when it was an industrial area, or like the mill or the Beck Cohen building, where the street level is way above where it is. So it's a natural place to put more building, right? To put more floor area, to put more housing, because if we think that tall buildings are scary, which is not really something I submit to, then they're not as tall because they're lower. And that's another great example where the natural topography of Charlottesville is hilly, and a lot of the times we don't take that into account at all when we plan. If we see height as something to be afraid of and to try to minimize, then you would think that we would be all over that. That said, the tallest building in Charlottesville is the Monticello Hotel. It's at one of the highest points in Charlottesville, and lots of people seem to think it's a pretty good building.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. Actually, not to change the subject, but the whole Artful Lodger SUP application, where 3 of our councils decided to send that back to planning, and
back to this dude.
Back to this guy.
Yeah.
And the argument from all 3 was effectively aesthetic. They didn't like the height and they didn't like the bulk. And I'm just thinking, okay, well, if you compare the height, say, with the Omni, which is right across the street, it's not that much taller, and it's definitely not as bulky as the Omni. So it seems to me that a lot of these aesthetic complaints are really just subjective, and to me, they don't make a lot of sense because the buildings we have in this city really are not that tall or big anyway.
Yeah, and to me, that one is not to comment too much on I guess what's now a pending application again, but some of the rationales for that I think were egregious. Again, we have our downtown area, which is in our architectural design review district, and so the BAR will get to this eventually, and they're going to say, well, they let you build that tall with that special use permit, but we decide how it looks, and we don't like massing, even though we really like the Monticello Hotel and the Wells Fargo building, both of which are straight up boxes. We're going to say, pair off a whole bunch on the top. You're going to end up with something that looks like the Waterhouse condos, where all of those top floors, where the apartments that are finally now selling are, have almost as much outdoor space, these enormous outdoor terraces, as they have indoor space. So of course they're going for over $1 million a piece because they're mansions in the sky.
Yeah.
And all of those could be apartments. But of course there it would be illegal to put more density without a special use permit. Same deal with the Artful Lodger. And what we found, the people we hear from, and this is a great example of the broken incentive structure and just process structure of how city planning works, is everyone who came out to that meeting lives directly across the street in condos at McGuffey, next to McGuffey Hill in the McGuffey condos. Again, they're 30, 40 feet higher just physically because of the topography.
Right.
So it's equivalent of taking 3 stories off. And they're coming out here and saying, well, I moved into this downtown urban environment because I want to be able to walk to work and to shops and to restaurants. And like, how dare you consider putting all of these apartments across the street from me? Like, keep these people out.
But to
and
their
what
credit,
you get by right instead is going to be a 6-story office building or a 6-story apartment building that has something like 24 units. So again, they're all going to have to be enormous. They're all going to be enormously expensive.
It seems to me that when they said they were going to send it back to planning, that they were going to try to achieve the same level of density but at less height. So I don't know how the math of that will work.
The same level of density, which is different, because the level of density that we approved, which is what's allowed by special use permit, it was pretty explicitly stated that as soon as the BAR starts lopping off that area off the top floors, because you're losing floor area, unless those apartments get prohibitively small and at some point gets below what's allowed to build, you're just not going to be able to fit that many units in there. So even as is, even if they straight up approved it, there's no way you'd actually get 134 units in there once BAR gets its way.
Yeah, and so it just seems to me it's like we have defined goals in the comp plan, talking about affordability, talking about environmental sustainability, less reliance on car use, and yet we're using aesthetic arguments to prevent that actual kind of development from taking place.
Let's do this. I'm mindful of your time. We're 70 minutes in. This has been one of my favorite shows. I love this topic. I learned from you guys here. Let me throw like some rapid fire at you,
Okay.
just so we kind of clear the agenda of topics I wanted to throw.
Sure.
Why don't we just say like 20, 30 seconds a take, bounce it back and forth, and I'll just keep them coming. And then we'll take the DMs and the tweets that we need to get to. All right, let's go Fashion Square. Fashion Square Mall. Anywhere you want to go.
Yes.
The future.
Yep. So Albemarle County is doing their own form-based code up there that I think is pretty promising. It's going to be an overlay. And essentially it's just going to say, if you want to build more stuff here, we're going to allow you under these conditions where we really care what it looks like. Here's what it's going to look like, and then you can do kind of whatever you want, I think. I haven't really read the details, but I'd like to see that whole area redevelop as they hope. That said, it's being used as an excuse to block housing down the street just outside the plan area, and that's kind of productive.
Scott?
Yeah, so in hot real estate markets around the country where we have these kinds of properties, outdated Class B and C properties that have wide parking lots and so forth, what we're seeing is a conversion to higher density, usually 5/1 stick frame with floor level parking, residential. And so I could see, since we're in a housing shortage, I could see that kind of an area like that being redeveloped into that sort of project. We're seeing the same thing with Great Eastern Management Company just down the road in Seminole Square. So yeah, I say change the zoning and make that more of a town center style community.
Scott, what do you want to see from the Market Street, Plan, Garage, Guadalajara, and Lucky 7?
Assuming it's going to happen, I'd say that what I'd like to see is to rezone the area for 10 stories, sell the air rights like I was talking about earlier, so you have 7 stories of housing over the 3 stories of garage. Obviously, definitely ground level retail, maybe have a little bit of setback at the corner of Market and Avon, and just like make it more of an entrance into the downtown area and have floor level retail so that it's more attractive.
Same for you.
Yeah, I think the proposal for just a straight up 3-story, 2-block parking garage is a travesty. It's going to look exactly like the Water Street garage does in terms of being an enormously long, completely dead area of the street. I would, again, like to see the city spend no more money than it has already spent. So we've already spent well over $5 million just on buying the land underneath those. And I think just on the 801 East Market surface lot alone, we can build enough parking, 90 spaces that we promised the county for their courthouses. And by partnering with the private developer, give them whatever they need to make it happen for free, because that's not a good use of $15 million.
Anthony on Twitter says, Jerry, asked the planning commissioner about the idea of converting the Virginia Electronic Component Building and maybe the development by Waffle House that we talked about earlier this week. Anywhere you want to go on that?
I mean, I like VEC, so
Yeah.
if they're going to move downtown, that's fine.
Ludwig's getting offers now for VEC because of the businesses that want to be strategically aligned with the disposable income that goes into like a Wegmans. And their model is to build in close proximity to stores like that. And let's face it, a supply chain and or a distributor of electronic parts probably can do that kind of business and cheaper and more affordable footprint. And we know Ludwig likes to make a buck.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
that's safe to say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's underestimated how much electronics work and manufacturing happens in Charlottesville and the Central Virginia area.
You know this.
I work at a hardware company. I was just down at our factory yesterday. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening in nondescript buildings around here. I think the Wegmans development is very much a product of the 20th century, an extremely car-centric giant strip mall with tons of pavement. It's a shame to see it pushing similar types of development in the surrounding area as well.
Thoughts?
I don't have an opinion on what that specific thing was about, so.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying about the car-centric development. I do think that VEC in the next I don't know. I hate to quantify it with time, but soonish is not going to be an electronic supply chain. The land is just entirely too valuable, and unfortunately, from what I'm hearing from in the business, a parking structure or deck of some kind will end up being built there because of the limited 12 to 14 spaces that are on site, which is prohibitive of any big box store trying to attract customers. All right, anywhere you want to go. Last question. You guys have final words. Anything in the news cycle, Charlottesville-centric, that we need to have on our radar that is maybe flying under the radar or something that's important to emphasize here?
No, I'd circle back to what we were just talking about VC and with the form-based code up in the Rio area is even if you redevelop those spaces to be a big box store or like a town center type of environment, those are all still going to be car-centric spaces. You can build 5/1s where you have apartments and ground floor parking, but when they go to work, they're going to be driving, and that's going to increase traffic in the area, certainly increases traffic when you build in Greene County just over the border because they're happy for the development. It's only if you focus on building housing in our city centers, in these historic and dense places that people love to live in, where you can walk to work, that we're really going to start addressing these climate goals we've set for ourselves.
Amen to that. So the issue that I'm really into right now is a Virginia state delegate in the Northern Virginia area proposed a bill to make duplex housing by right and effectively ban single-family zoning throughout the state. Assuming that doesn't pass, although it's getting interest in other states as well, I think that Charlottesville, led by leaders such as Michael Payne, who I know is interested in this issue, we should look at that we should look at that sort of bill for our own idea as well. Minneapolis did it as well, and basically, just legislation that says single-family zoning is illegal in the city everywhere. Duplexes or ADUs are legal by right.
Yeah, and if I can jump on that a little bit,
Yeah.
I think that bill is unfortunately under aggressive. Like it could be doing a lot better. And a year ago, we had an almost finished comp plan that calls for fourplexes in all zones. I think it's, what it calls for duplexes are defined as single family attached in our code. So it's not really ending single family zoning. And B, when you get up to fourplexes, that fourth unit is when it gets subject to FHA, Fair Housing Act requirements for accessibility. So as our population ages and people need the ground floor units where they don't need to climb stairs as they age, it's super important that we get that fourth unit where maybe it's more expensive to build those and it won't pencil out, but it provides a huge benefit for the community to have those accessible homes. And I'd love to see us do that like we almost committed to a year ago.
I loved everything that happened today. Update one more time of what's going on in your life next week.
So I'm moving to New York City on Monday, and I'm going up there to try and launch a consultancy that
awesome.
brings better land use reforms, the exact things that we've been talking about this entire show, that works with public and private interests to try to bring these reforms into cities. And I thought that going to New York City, where there's all kinds of real estate interests that are just chomping at the bit to develop that city and develop underutilized spaces, I thought that would be a good place to go and build a client base starting out.
I love it. I
Yeah.
appreciate the hustle. How about a snapshot on you? I'm going to say this. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. Charlottesville's lucky to have you
Thanks.
on the planning
Absolutely,
commission.
yeah.
I truly, truly mean that. I know it is underappreciated position. It's compensated, what, $500?
I think $1,000 a year.
Okay, $1,000 a year.
And free pizza sometimes.
Free pizza sometime. A lot
That
of
was key.
shit. A lot of shit often. Charlottesville's lucky to have you. What's planned for Rory over the next, say, year or 2 years?
Yeah, well, I had hoped to be out of the Planning Commission business by now, since we were wrapping up our comp plan as I joined, and we should have been about done with our zoning ordinance rewrite by now. We should be living in this great future of having abundant and affordable housing and welcoming new neighbors into town. Unfortunately, the city decided to throw a wrench in that process and drop $1 million on some consultants. So it's looking like we're stretching until late this year. Hopefully, we'll have a housing strategy. Early next year, we'll adopt the comp plan. I think by
So
fall we'll have a draft one, and then 2022 to get our zoning ordinance. Get this, when I went to my first comp plan kickoff session, it's been going on for over 3 years now, back in July 2017, I was 25 years old. By the time we finish this process, I will be 30.
Wow.
So, we wonder...
Are you going to make it to the finish line?
We'll see.
That's the hardest question I asked you today.
I hope not. I hope that we speed up the process and I can get the hell out of here. But we wonder why the groups of people that we hear from are so skewed demographically. Why we don't hear from young people and
it's because you
people
need
who work.
money.
It's because you have to devote enormous amounts of time,
resources,
all of the time, for years on end to get even a minimal amount of change in this town, and it's a goddamn shame.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as somebody who grew up here and wants to see this be like a cool urban city with densibility and walkability, I'm glad we have people like Rory on Planning Commission. We don't have enough people like this who are effectively pro-growth, pro-urban, pro-housing, pro-transit. That is not
pro-entrepreneurship,
pro-entrepreneurship. Like we don't have this representation in our city, not on the city council, and hardly on any of the other bureaucracies.
Yeah, I agree. And so now I work for a renewable energy tech company that's doing really cool stuff here in town. We're right over above Citizen Burger. You can come check us out. There's high voltage all over the place. Don't touch anything if you visit our office. But we're doing really cool work there, and I love pushing the boundaries of tech to get solar and battery storage into more homes to really reduce the grid's dependence on fossil fuels. And I think this planning work goes hand in hand with that. To me, this urbanism and having more housing, it's not just about affordability, though that's a huge part of it. I never would have been able to bootstrap my startup if I wasn't paying $325 in rent a month. It's about being able to live in these places where you're not reliant on burning gallons of fossil fuels every single day to just get around your day.
That is literally what happened with us launching this business 11 years ago. $375 a month for us. Teresa in Toronto says, thank you, Scott and Jerry and Rory. Fascinating show. She's watching in Toronto. All right, for the people that are tuning in, that are loving what they're hearing, we're going to archive the show on ilovecville.com. Judah Wickhauer, our director, is going to take the audio from the show and turn it into a podcast. He'll do both by close of business today. For 30 days following today's show, we'll syndicate it across the I Love CVille network, which is 17 Facebook pages, 17 Twitter accounts. We have the third largest Instagram community in Central Virginia, and an e-newsletter that goes out to 125,000 inboxes every morning at 11 a.m. I close the show with the same message. It's just the golden rule. I don't even make it about religion. Just treat the people in your life how you want to be treated yourself. It's the golden rule. He's Rory. He's Scott. I'm Jerry. Enjoy your weekend. Keep it local. Keep the dollars in the community. Get after it. Be safe, but keep it local. Take care, guys. Dude, crushed it.
Thank you.
Seriously,
Thank you.
crushed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Anytime. Always. Anytime. One more thing real quick. We're going to get a quick photo.
Sounds good.